What Dave's going to do is we're going to do an introduction to improvisation, and it really is. It's funny. When I first got into it and asked Dave to do this, I was expecting something different. I had all my students learn like some basic blues because I thought to myself, being a classical musician, mostly doing very little improvisation, I thought, it would be interesting for my students. Just I've played a couple of shows and stuff where you're playing marimba and you have to improvise just a teeny little bit, and there are some chords and they give you and stuff. And I've done a lot of free improvisation with a group that I play with, and I was always amazed at people who can kind of get you to think outside the box and think in a different way and approach playing. And I spent many hours. The first time I had to do it, my friend made me sit and keep a log and told me to improvise for 15 minutes every day. And the first day I sat down and did it, I sat in front of like this weird drum set and I just had zero ideas. So I just sat there for 15 minutes. And then I came back the next day and I played a little and tinkered around. And by the end of the week, I was thinking about just music in a different way. And it was really nice, freeing me up, especially from coming from reading a lot of music and not improvising as much like most of the classical players had. So when Dave did this for my students a few weeks ago during classes, I was like, I got to be honest, that I told Dave, I'll just kind of introduce you and then I'll sit in the background. And within 15 minutes, I was like, head deep into this, because his attitude is, it had nothing to do with jazz. It just had doing about creating lines and thinking ideas and dealing with color. So it's perfect for those people who are really new and don't know even where to start. With that, I'm going to turn the mic over to Dave. So this is Professor Berkman, and thank you very much for doing this for us.
Last time I just started talking about improvising, and that's is what this topic is. Looking out, I see a lot of people who are at all different levels. We have some jazz people here, we have some classical people, we have, more older, maybe more advanced classical players, a lot of different levels. But for me, it's really important that I don't, notes and written sheet music is a set of directions. It tells you how long to play a note for, what note to play, and that's what it gives you, as a kind of set of directions. But I can make music a lot of different ways, and one thing that I think has always been important for me was that I could engage with the instrument and listen to what it sounds like and play different sounds. So last time when I did this, I just started talking, but this time I thought maybe I'll play a little bit first. So I'll take my headphones off so I'm not listening through the medium of this. Okay. So when I'm improvising, let's go back to this camera. When I'm making something up, when I'm playing, I'm just looking at, I'm giving myself some kind of frame, some way to relate to making sounds, and something that I can do at the instrument. Now, if you go to the chat, I gave you, there's something in there, there's a PDF called Ideas for Improvisers. And this was just a few ideas that I just sort of wanted to give you a place to start. Because if I say to you, you know, that whatever instrument you play, you can just try and make things up, then that's one of those kind of freedoms that is sort of a useless freedom. It's sort of like, hey, you can write a novel, just write about whatever you want. And, you know, that's not the easiest thing to do. There's something called white paper syndrome where, you know, the fact that you have complete freedom is not giving you a lot of ideas, and a lot of what Michael Lipsy was talking about when he said he was sitting at the drum set with no particular ideas of where to start. So if you look at that ideas for improvisers, I guess, you know, so the first way I wanted to talk about improvising is really improvising. You know, one of the things that I noticed is in a lot of jazz schools, there are improvising classes or improv workshops, and what they end up talking about is chord scales. And chord scales are a really interesting and important way to improvise, and it's useful, but there's this way in which improvising can happen on a much more sort of granular level that doesn't have to take in quite so much theory. And it's just a question of having kind of a naive approach to making sounds. You know, it's interesting for jazz players, we have this long tradition of some of the people who are the most famous jazz musicians that are working today. People like Herbie Hancock and Pat Metheny and John Schofield, and just to name a few. Those are all people that went through an extensive period where they played a lot of free music. And I think that's not, Chick Corea is another one, you know. They may do some of that now. Someone like Herbie Hancock actually plays quite a lot of free music these days. But at any case, the point is that you have to think about playing free in these other ways, aside from thinking just in terms of making things out of jazz theory, I think. And so if I'm looking at playing free, what I'm really thinking about is that same idea that when you have sheet music, it's a set of instructions, it's a map. It's a way that the composer has structured the music so that you will be able to follow that roadmap towards making sounds. But I can make up a different kind of roadmap. So in the free pieces, you know, what I wrote they're just frameworks to, you know, foster improvisation. I wrote down 8 different ideas, but there's many, many more. And I really encourage you to try and come up with your own. So the first one I really tried to do is just to be simple, was to say, okay, I'm just going to start with making a single line melody. And if I'm going to make different melodies with this, maybe one idea might be about intervals. So that's a little piece that's all about fourths. It was fourths going up and fourths going down. And all I did was, you know, this thing that happens when you're improvising, when you have this kind of frame, is that you have all these choices you can make. You have choices about volume, you have choices about intensity, you have choices about, you know, tension and release. And all those things happen when you're following this frame. So that was my fourth piece. And I could do another one with another a different kind of frame. I'm going to do fourths and whole steps this time. Okay, now again, I'm really picking things that are not in any particular key. And you know, some of your interest in when you start improvising, you know, is interesting. I had a classical string quartet that wanted to do some improvisational things based on a jazz composer named John Zorn, who had written a lot of sort of Jewish kind of music, klezmer. Influenced music, and so we got together, and I thought, okay, let's do some pieces where we just experiment with different sounds and clashes and intervals. And very often when I would ask them to improvise, they were, you know, violinists and cellists and violists, they would kind of come back with a kind of very Russian sort of like minor kind of like 19th century kind of sound, a romantic kind of sound, which made me realize that that was what was in their ear. That was really what was in their ear, was this kind of, a certain kind of cadence, a certain kind of harmony. And I'm really asking you to even be a little more naive than that. There was a great drummer named, oh God, his name is shot out of my head, Paul Motion. And one of the things people used to say about Paul Motion was he looked like a little kid when he played the drums. He had this almost kind of naive appreciation of what he was doing, like he was just making it up in the moment, So when I'm doing this, I'm just I'm asking myself a question. What does a fourth sound like? And it becomes a musical cadence. Now, and again, I picked fourths at random. It could be any kind of interval. It could be not, I could not be thinking intervallically. I could be thinking differently. One way I could think about is I'm just going to try and make a motive, a musical motif, a musical idea. Just so a motive in music is sort of like the simplest musical sentence, a kind of a very simple source material. Then I'm going to develop it a little bit, and that's all I'm going to try and do now. Okay, so that was my piece. That's that's my little motive piece. So sometimes just like coming up with a motive and watching it develop. One thing that happens very often when I work on free improvising with a group, one of the things that people tend to be a little bit nervous about is that moment when you get the sound that you didn't want, or you get a sound that's like a little bit more clashy. So one of the things I'll often ask people to do is look for clashy notes. Instead of trying to avoid them, look for them. Because there really isn't any right or wrong with any of these things. There's no right or wrong with notes. There's just sound, right? So if I have a very discordant sound or a very clashy sound, then it can resolve into something less discordant, less stressy. So I tend to think of it more in terms of certain notes have more tension that sort of come with them than others. So in this case, I might seek out some of those tense sounds, or try and think about how to resolve it. Again, I'm looking for something kind of simple. So another one of the ones that I have in there is number 5 in that free piece suggestions is play 2 notes anywhere and then have one of the notes move. Now look for another 2 notes. And another. So again, right now I'm just doing these really little miniatures. Just take one idea and see if you can find, if you can experiment with ways to express it. One of the reasons why I'm starting with these kind of small things is because within these little free pieces are all the musical decisions that happen when I think you're playing at your best in a jazz contest, maybe with the most complex music. But still, the kind of decisions you're making, does it resolve? Is it time for a pause? Do I want to change dynamics or intensity? All those things happen at the same basic level when you're dealing with these miniatures. Another idea, number 3 on that list, was to make a motive but focus on the rhythmic side of it. So this is something that if you're, say, a drummer, this would be a natural thing to do, is to like kind of picture this as, a groove. So something that repeats. And if I did something like that, So again, I'm not, I'm not, I don't have anything in mind really particularly for these, and I'm just improvising whatever comes into my head. But all these kind of techniques, all these ideas that you might have, are things that you can use to explore your instrument. And I'm doing this on the piano, and if you're a non-pianist, you can certainly use the piano, because none of these things are tremendously technically difficult. I'm a piano player, so I'm going to express this in the whatever, in my vocabulary as a jazz musician, as a pianist. But these things could all be done very simply. Another idea is maybe just to play a note and then see how it sounds with different notes harmonizing it. Now, the reason why I tend to bring these things up so much in terms of as a place to start with improvising is because of that thing that Michael actually mentioned at the beginning of this the conversation, which is, I think a lot of times when people think about improvising, they think about learning a 12-bar blues. And we're actually going to talk about a little bit about a 12-bar blues at the end. But a 12-bar blues is of something that's very stylistically centered in a kind of music that you might not be involved in. So if you're somebody who's played a tremendous amount of classical music, and some of it 20th century music ideally, because this is, I'm in a kind of free harmonic context that sort of suggests, to the 20th century, or I guess we're on the 21st century now. But anyway, that kind of harmonic freedom is available to me, as a sort of contemporary sounding music. So I think it's fine to learn blues, and I think it's great to learn something about the blues tradition and blues melodies. But with that kind of music, if you decide you want to learn jazz because you're interested in it from a stylistic perspective, that's great. And then there's going to be a lot of stylistic things to learn about. There's going to be, whatever, articulation and feel and swing feel and rhythm and voicings and all this other kind of stuff. But that's really not necessary for improvising. Improvising is about going to your instrument and trying to express something and trying to find sounds that interest you. That's when I mentioned before that so many of the great improvising jazz musicians of today have spent time in the world of free music. I think that is, there's a value that you get from spending that kind of time. Also, also for composers often improvise. Even if they're not full-time pianists, they often improvise at the piano because it's obvious that this kind of, sort of playing with these ideas with any particular musical frame that you come up with could easily be developed into compositions or pieces that are written out. So there's a number of other things on that list, but more important than that list is that I think that you get an idea of what kinds of things are ways for you to start. And one of the things, I write a lot of music as well, and one of the issues that I had at different points in my life with writing music was I'd get stuck, or I would have some kind of idea in my head that was sort of keeping me from moving forward. And it was really helpful for me to have a list, for me to just have a bunch of ideas of places I could go. And that is a big part of how I work on improvising to this day. And I do that thing that Professor Lipsy was talking about, in that I will often, the first thing I do when I get up is go to the piano and just see what's there, and sort of just spend time. All of that for me, I feel like has the effect of really musically charging my batteries, because I'm doing something where ease and flow are really crucial parts of this. And so I'm just trying to create just some kind of musical flow, something that's interesting to me. And then, I can always pursue it in more detail. But for me, it was a very liberating idea to use this idea that that I can practice, that I can structure any musical area that I want to work on in terms of creating this kind of a free improvisatory frame. I'll just tell you a little bit how I use this in my playing, for those people that are here that are are looking for some more connection to where this goes for me. One of the things that you might be working on is a piece of music that has a lot of fast notes in it. For example, in the world of jazz, we often play tunes that are at a fast tempo. And one thing I might be doing is to take that into a free context. Is if I was, for example, there's this form in jazz called rhythm changes, and people play very fast on it, and it has a lot of chords. It has a lot of chords, and then you solo with a lot of, dexterity over it, hopefully. But again, I would try and separate those things out. And if I wanted to play a song that had a lot of fast notes, or I might improvise something in that same style. I might play something like, if I could experiment with different ways. Those kind of sounds are things that, okay, I'll put it in a free context. Sometimes I look at playing free music, it's a little bit like getting a blurry picture of what you're doing. So I'll try and create a cloud, I'll try and create some kind of mood, some kind of thing that reflects the essence of what that music sort of sounds like without any of the details. Without the chords, without the harmony, none of that specifically. And I'll see if I can sort of create a texture and then gradually bring it into focus by bringing more of those elements in. So, this little part of this, I can sort of move on from this and go to some other areas, but I really encourage you to spend time just looking at the instrument and seeing what interests you. I mean, it's as naive as saying to yourself, what intervals do you like? Look, I mean, we use them all and we like them all, I guess. But, looking for sounds like that, like the sounds I was just playing, which were based on fourths or based on, some kind of combination of pitches. I'm looking at these different kind of shapes that intrigue me. And that's where I try and start with improvising. Okay. If you have any questions, like I said, please put them in the chat. Click speaker view to see. Okay, we're still in the tech world. Okay, so but if you have any questions about any of this stuff, please feel free to put them in the chat, and I will sort of keep an eye on it, and maybe Carlos can also feed them to me. But anyway, feel free to ask questions about any stuff or comments that you have. Okay, moving on. So the next thing that I'm going to talk about in terms of improvising is really playing by ear, because that's the next thing that you can do. And again, all these things are somewhat, I think, are liberating. So I just did a record, music of John Coltrane and Pete Seeger, and it was really interesting playing these Pete Seeger tunes. If you don't know who so John Coltrane is a very famous and very sort of harmonically involved, complicated tenor sax player and composer. Really one of the key figures in jazz. And Pete Seeger is a folk singer who wrote This Land Is Your... I guess he didn't write This Land Is Your Land. I think Woody Guthrie wrote that. But he sang songs like This Land Is Your Land and We Shall Overcome. He wrote that. So he's written a lot of very iconic, some of the really famous folk tunes. And so I did this. I was playing a lot of folk music, and it was... so this kind of very, very sort of simple melodies that you've heard. And, so my question to you in that regard is, if you're a classical musician, if you spend a lot of time reading music, you want to give yourself permission to look for these melodies. Now, when I play a melody like that, there's a lot of things I can do with it. These kind of songs, or a song like, again, I can start by just playing a song like that, just with the melody, and just working it out. Now, if you make a mistake, that's absolutely fine. You always have two choices when you make a mistake or when you hear something and a note comes out that's different than what you wanted. And I would encourage you to try both. One thing you can do is you can stop and you can look for the right note or for the note that you intended. And doing that kind of work really helps sharpen your ear. And that's a valuable thing by itself. But also, sometimes you want to go with the musical flow. And so in that case, I would say when you play a note that you didn't intend, you use it to embellish the melody. Now, I can add to this, and one thing I can do is I can keep playing the melody for a while. If you're comfortable, look around for bass notes. No, and I can keep going with this. You know, I could add more and more harmony to it. So anyway, I'm just, and again, I'm really starting with something simple. Now, I have to say, when I was younger, and I was really interested, I was from a very early age really interested in jazz. So I didn't really want to do this stuff. I didn't want to play melodies based on those kind of songs. What's funny now is, you know, as a 61-year-old jazz musician, I'm going back and playing songs like that, and I really like them. But when you're starting out, especially if you haven't done that much improvising, just looking around for melodies is a great thing to do, you know. And really, you know, obviously you get a lot of people here, I'm sure, have a lot of harmony that they've been taught, or you're working on harmony. You know, for most of these kind of songs, they're going to be available to you just using 1, 4, and 5, the three, you know, primary chords. Okay. Yeah, I'll address that, Matthew. That's a good question. But when you're searching for, like, again, you know, I think you want to, like, spend time just taking. One thing we're trying to get is we're trying to develop that capacity to play the things that we hear, right? And so as a human being, you know, growing up in this society, you're going to hear many things that are not just the classical music that you have to prepare for your lessons. So, you know, looking around for those things and being able to work on that capacity to hear something and play it is something that I think is really, really important. So just for me, just to answer Matthew's question really quickly in the chat, yeah, for me, that free playing thing has been crucial, and it's actually been a really important of my playing for the last 30 years. I went through a period where, actually, when I moved to New York, I was playing in a lot of bebop bands, and there was this one record company that a lot of people were getting record deals with, and my friends all had deals with this one company, and I kept being put up for as a potential person. The guy just did not like me, and he wouldn't. And so this bebop label, he was hiring all my friends and doing a lot of records with other people, and I got angry. I got mad at bebop, which of course is silly. But anyway, I found myself going back and playing a lot of free music. And ever since that time, and really even before, I mean, so for me, the music that so in jazz, I had to go back and look at a lot of traditional ways of playing. You know, bebop music has a big influence on where jazz is today. And I spent a lot of time working on all those areas, and I love that kind of music. But I have to say, the thing that first brought me into jazz was something, it wasn't just that. You know, I think most people who come to jazz don't start at the very beginning, they start somewhere in the middle. So when I was in high school, I was really interested in the way Keith Jarrett played solo piano. And he had a lot of he did a lot of concerts where he would just improvise. And so because I'm of the age where the music of the 70s, late 60s and 70s had a pretty big impact on the group of musicians that I was in my generation, I had this parallel track that free music was really important. And the thing that I noticed, though, that thing that I mentioned before, if I want to play rhythm changes at a fast tempo, or let's say Giant Steps, this is a song that has a lot of chords in it, it might be interesting to just do some free pieces where you play sounds and clusters and move around to different harmonies, and you just do this kind of sort of impression of what that song is. And in some ways, we get hung up on the details of music. And I think playing free or playing a melody by ear is a way of accessing that music in a more direct way. There's this way that you're just trying to cut through all the things that you need to know. I think a lot of times people feel that they really need to know a certain thing before they're allowed to play. But playing is at the heart of playing music, the word play, right? So that, for me, that has always been a really important thread. Okay, so taking a folk song or a pop tune, if you want to try and look for notes, knowing that it's going to be the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord. I'm in the key of F when I was playing This Land is Made for You and Me. This Land is Your Land. And so it starts on the 4 chord, it goes to the 1 chord, it goes to the 5 chord, it goes back to the 1 chord. If you've ever played folk guitar and you have 3 chords, there's D that looks kind of like this, and there's G that looks like this, and there's C that looks like this. That's embarrassing for all the really serious jazz guitar players in the room. But if you know those 3 chords, you can basically play a lot of harmony. So doing that kind of thing and finding 1, 4, and 5, the tonic, the subdominant, and the dominant on songs is a very useful and valuable thing. But I could also do something even simpler. Let's see. I picked one song that's not a very good choice for this. Okay, so I'm just putting the whole thing over one pedal. I'm only playing F in my left hand. So, that is also a thing that's available to me. I don't have to make it so much about harmony if my interest is in harmony. But one thing I want to suggest is that this whole idea about improvising, about being able to take a musical element, a musical rudiment, and search for things that you're interested in, is, I think, a very liberating idea, and something that you can really utilize to get to know more harmony. So on the second page of the PDF, there's this thing called, it's listed ear training, and I always think of it as the pedal exercise. And it's, all I'm going to do is I'm going to play a root, and I'm in F, so I'm going to stay in F. And then I'm going to play a scale over it. Now that scale I'm playing it's called a Lydian scale. It's a 1, 2, 3, sharp 4, 5, 6, 7 scale. Those are the notes of the, in relationship to the root. But that is the scale I'm using, and that's where I'm starting. And I'm starting there for a reason which will sort of become obvious as I do it. But I'm just going to start, all I want to do is I want to get to know that scale. So I can alternate singing and playing, and I'm just getting to really know the elements of this scale. Again, it's not jazz, it's not anything, it's just melodies out of a scale, right? And that is really what I'm trying to do. I can challenge myself to use unusual intervals. Or I can just try and make a melody that that's really singable and something I can really play. Ba, bo, de, da, ooh, ee, ah. Okay, so I'm going to spend a little time on that one scale, and then I'm going to flat the sharp 4 so that I have just a natural 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 scale, the regular do, re, mi major scale. Now, I'm playing it with one finger because it really doesn't, this is not about piano technique. You don't have to have a lot of technique. You don't have to practice your scales to do this. You can just try and find sounds. So again, I'm going to focus on the new note. Again, I'm just trying to get what I hear and what I can find harmonically. Now the thing about scales is they're too big. Scales have 7 notes, and if you play scales like this, it doesn't really sound like anything. I mean, it sounds like a scale. It sounds like running up and down it's an effect. It's not a melody. So I'm trying to find melodies. And every part of the scale is a little source of melodic material. There's a little part that surrounds the root. The 5th is like an alternate root. It's kind of another resting place in the scale. This natural 4, which is the new note, it has this place it kind of wants to go. Kind of wants to go to 3. So, again, I'm just looking at what melodic things are available to me, and then I'm going to flat the major 7, and I'm going to have a flat 7 in the scale. That scale's name is Mixolydian, but that doesn't really matter. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7, 1. That's how I want to know these scales in terms of the root. Again, I'm not making melodies. I'm not judging. I mean, I am making melodies. I'm not trying not to judge. I'm just letting whatever is in there come out. And if I can hear it and sing it, that's great. If I can't sing it, but I can, then I'm going to look for it. And this process of listening to what I'm playing and experimenting with the sound of that scale is going to put those sounds in my ears. You know, this is, for me, this is ear training. And for years, I hated ear training classes, both taking them and teaching them. And I'll tell you why. Because ear training in a class, it ends up being like a demonstration of what you can do. And when ear training at home with your instrument ends up being a workout where you get to keep checking what you actually have internalized. That's the difference. So for me, when I'm practicing these kind of things like finding a melody, transposing a melody, all those things, or just putting a scale in a different order, all those things are about really locking into something that's internal, that's in my head, and reproducing it at my instrument, or looking at something that's not in my head and getting to spend time with it so that I can put it in my head. You know, so this is, I sort of conceive of ear training as something a little bit more everyday and personal than what happens in a lot of ear training classes. Okay, so I'm up to the Mixolydian scale. If I flat the third, I'm going to get the Dorian scale, and that sounds like this. Now, again, all this stuff I'm talking about it's relatively simple, I think, in terms of, okay, I'm just trying to play over a scale, and I can find the notes of the scale, and then I can change the order. But I always go back to this conversation that I had with a vocalist. We were on our way to a gig, and somehow I do teach a lot of harmony classes, but I'm not usually just looking for ways to inject the Dorian scale into everyday conversation. But somehow the Dorian scale came up. And she said, "Oh, Dorian scale, I should remember that. I took a harmony class. I should remember which one that is." You know, and the point is, you don't want to know the scales like that. You don't want to know scales like it's something that you learned in school that is of not, you know, sort of not, and without a lot of relevance to your musical life. The point about the Dorian scale is it's this beautiful scale. It's a minor scale, but it's got this real majory note in it. It's got this creamy sixth sound in it. So that's what a Dorian scale is. You know, it's got that sound. And in the next scale, so I'm going to spend some time playing on the Dorian scale and singing the Dorian scale, and then I'm going to move to the Aeolian scale. And that has a flat sixth. So it has this, that's a more tragic sounding minor. Okay, so I'm getting to know all these scales in a really intimate way, and then I'm going to flat the 2, and I get the Phrygian scale, and then I flat the 5, and I get the Locrian scale. So this is, you can see on the PDF that all these scales are written out in numbers from the root, and they're all when I'm saying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 assumes a major scale, and then sharp 4 is a Lydian scale, so it's a scale that has a major scale with a sharp 4. And when you have 1 flat 2 flat 3 4 flat 5 flat 6 flat 7, which is a Locrian scale, that's a major scale with a flat 2 flat 3 natural 4 flat 5 flat 6 flat 7. All those numbers in terms of sharps or flats are in relation to a major scale. So that's just what that is. And you know, the person who I saw do this, the first person I saw arrange this ear training exercise in this kind of way, did a really nice thing with it. He had a sitar guitar playing in the background, and so it's just like this kind of pedal sound. And he just played. He didn't talk about anything. He just sort of played through all the scales. Again, this is improvising, right? I mean, I'm making melodies. Yes, it's scale-oriented. Yes, it's kind of an exercise. But, you know, there have been so much great music played on all these scales, from Gregorian chants to John Coltrane songs like Alabama and you know, lots and lots of others. There's been all this modal music that has happened. So this is, again, another frame. It's a relatively simple frame. if you play an instrument that is not a piano, you can sit at a piano, play the bass note, and step on the sustain pedal, and then play your instrument. Play, whatever instrument you can sing, or you can play a horn or a violin, a guitar, whatever. You can play over this pedal sound. And doing these really simple things, which are about unlocking a very, like a beautiful flow with notes that are kind of already there for you to kind of choose among, is a very easy step towards improvising. Any questions about that? I think I'm going to move on from that pedal exercise. Thoughts, questions, comments? Can you imagine doing this? The pedal tone and the scale provide a wonderful opportunity to really hear the quality of each scale. Yes, that's exactly right. And I'll just tell you, I didn't do that scale exercise. Oh, thank you. Thanks for the applause, CJ and JJ. I didn't do this exercise for a long time. I learned this kind of later in life. I wish someone had made me do that at an earlier point in my development. But I saw the person do it when I was about 30 something, and then I started going back and doing this exercise as somebody who'd spent a lot of time with these scales. And the thing that I learned about it was interesting to do this as as a somewhat literate jazz performer. And I got a lot out of it. Again, I think one of the things that you get out of these things is, it's funny, when I was younger, I spent a lot of time practicing complicated things. And as I get older, I tend to spend more time on relatively simple things. And, so there's this way that if you make a change in how you hear a scale, that's a very fundamental quality that could have a big rippling effect on your musical life, in a way that being able to play something really complex in 13 might not have the same sort of ripple effect through everything you do, because it's a less fundamental thing that you're working on. So actually the experience that I had with this was I noticed, again, this is, and if you're not a jazz player, this is maybe not quite as crucial, but, I noticed that I heard a lot better on certain scales than on other scales. And particularly the Locrian scale was a sound that, even though I'd been playing on that, using that scale, I don't think I really had it in my ear quite the same way. Also, as you play, so the other thing I would suggest is that every day you do that. If you decide you want to try that or training exercise, do that every day in a different key. And so I was in F today, so tomorrow I'm in B flat, then I'm in E flat, then A flat, then D flat, G flat, B, E, A. You move around to a bunch of different keys, and so you're sort of seeing some scales that some keys that you have less familiarity in, and that's helpful. And then the other thing that happened with me is I had always kind of wanted to practice away from the piano. I'd heard of people doing that, like Mozart or whoever, people that, write symphonies sitting at a desk and all that kind of thing. And I had always, as a piano player, I'd always been pretty attached to the instrument and found it sort of unsatisfying to practice away from the piano. But actually after doing that exercise for about 30 minutes a day for, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks, I found myself practicing, like I'd be lying in bed and I would just picture a tone and I would just start practicing over in that key. And so I was doing a lot of practicing in my head that I had never really done before, and I did it almost without planning to. It was like, because that exercise was so fundamental and so clearly something that you keep re-internalizing every day that you do it. Every day you do it in another key, and it helps you really sort of cement those relationships into your hearing. So that was very helpful to me, and it really had a big impact at a certain point in my development. So it's definitely something that I could recommend to you. And actually, if you are interested in jazz and jazz musicians playing on it, there's a terrific video by a great guitarist named John Scofield called On Improvisation. And what he does is he just plays on every scale, and for two different scales and all their modes. So he plays on the melodic minor scale and the major scale. And it's beautiful because he'll play, someone will play a C major chord and he'll play these lines and he's only using the notes of the scale, but he sounds exactly like, if he's a guitar player that you're familiar with, he sounds just like John Scofield. He sounds like himself on that material. So, this is a nice way to think about internalizing something if you get interested in being if you are a jazz musician, or if you're interested in developing that, you want to keep finding the music in all this harmony, and that's what I like about this. Anyway, yeah, so that is a nice. It's a really nice video, which you can find pretty easily online. John Schofield on improvisation. Okay, so if there are no more questions, I'm going to go really quickly through a little bit of blues. And again, I say this with a little bit of, I don't want to say concern exactly. You don't need to play blues. Is what I really want to say. You know, when I was taking counterpoint, I asked the counterpoint teacher if I should be listening to a whole lot of Palestrina so I could get the sound in my ear and I could just make some stuff that sounds like it. You know, like I could use the general vibe to understand how the music sounds. And she said, no, it's all about following the rules and about really doing this, you know, following the, you know, first species, second species. Anyway, the counterpoint rules. It's really about mastering those rules. I don't know if someone might disagree with her, but at any rate, that is not true for playing the blues. I think if you want to play the blues, you have to listen to people playing the blues. And, you know, really one of the things is that there's a lot of melodies that have been created on this, and there's a certain feeling to playing the blues that comes from the experience of a lot of the great musicians that we've heard do it. But the thing about blues is that it's two things in jazz. Blues is a quality that you hear on chords, and in that sense, it is a scale that is played, can be played over all the chords in a particular key, when you're playing blues in a particular key. But blues is also a form, meaning a chord progression. So if you look at that PDF, the last page is a really basic blues in C, and that is this. So if I'll just play it, and just so you can be really clear, again, if you're not a pianist, this level of piano is something that's available to all, you know, musically literate people. So I would, you know, one thing that we do in the jazz department a lot is really get everybody to play piano to some degree, because it's a really useful keyboard harmony instrument, right? It's like the guitar is good, but you can't play as many notes on the guitar, and the fretboard, the way it's set up with the strings, is more complex. The piano is sort of easier to visualize for somebody who's not, even for somebody who's not a pianist. Once you get a little bit of sense of the black and white keys and where they go, it's pretty easy to play fairly complex harmony on the piano in a way that's more difficult on stringed instruments. At any rate, so I'm going to just play 1, 3, and 7 for all the chords, and if you follow along on that PDF, this is it. So I'll play quarter notes. That's it. Now, blues is really, really prevalent in the world of pop music, and obviously blues is a whole genre of music unto itself, and they play other forms as well, but this 12-bar blues is a really common one. It's also in TV themes, it's in rock. Johnny B. Good is a really famous rock tune that is, you know, but many of Rolling Stones songs are blues. I mean, it's like, it is really common in the world of rock and jazz and blues, and you just hear it all the time. It was the theme of Batman was a blues. The theme of Spider-Man was a minor blues. These TV shows themes. So it's like, it's just something that's so common in our society. So it might be something that feels kind of familiar. Boogie Woogie. Or this kind of, all these things are sort of variations that follow that same form. The 1 chord for 4 bars, the 4 chord for 2 bars, the 1 chord for 2 bars again, then 5, 4, 1. So it's this kind of simple form that has a lot of basic chords in it. They're all dominant sevenths, which is kind of unusual. That's a different quality that blues has. Okay, so that's the form. But even if I don't want to do the form, let me just play a root, and let me play the blues scale. So that's the blues scale, which is basically a minor pentatonic with one additional note. 1, flat 3, 4, sharp 4, 5, flat 7. It's a 6-note scale. Now, I can, just as I spent time with the other scales, I can spend time with this one. And that would be a good thing to do. You know, it'd also be good to listen to some blues and hear some people play on them. Obviously, people like B.B. King and Albert Collins is another, you know, lots and lots of great blues guitar players, and you can listen to jazz players playing blues. The vocabulary of people who are straight on blues players tends to be more focused on that scale that I just showed you. And rock players as well tend to be a little bit more focused on that scale. Jazz players tend to look at the chords and use the chords scales that are associated with that those chords for more harmonic embellishment. But even if I was just going to do something pretty simple, I'm going to play 1, 3, and 7 in my left hand, and I'm going to play the blues scale in my right hand. I'm trying to really do what I'm saying and not add anything to it, but that's enough. I mean, there's a lot of music that I can make out of that. Now, another interesting thing about blues is that you often have a melody which is essentially just a 4-bar phrase repeated. So if I played one of them, this is one called Bag's Groove. That's the one I wrote on the page. Okay, that was one written by a great vibes player named Milt Jackson, and but blues often follows that form. You'll have a melody a couple times with a lot of repetition in it. Not always. Again, there's lots of variation in this, and you can also have a lot more additional harmony that we're not looking at. But I'm just looking at a pretty basic approach to this. But again, so I might have the melody played a couple times and then solos. And again, one place to start with this would be to just work on playing melodies out of the blues scale. Now, it's a little unusual. One of the things that's unusual about blues is we don't often have a scale that works over the whole song. And of course, again, I'm oversimplifying a little bit, but it is true that you can play the blues scale over all the chords in the blues form, and that is part of its unusual quality. There's this quality of bluesiness, which is a combination of major and minor sounds, you know, and it's derived from, you know, Black American music, jazz being a music that was developed and really innovated almost entirely by Black musicians in the U.S., although today it's played by a lot of different flavors of people. But that is an important sound that is really unique to this style of music. And again, one of the nice things about this as an approach, as a way in to start talking about improvising, is that it's available, it's accessible, right? You know, you don't have to start with the most difficult thing. You can start with something that's a little bit easier. So in this sense, playing the blues it's important to, I think it gives you a leg up. It gives you a way in to kind of working with the form. But I've been going for a while, and I guess those are the maybe the 3 or 4 approaches that I think are really valuable for you to start, if you're not an improviser, to start improvising. And just to review them, the first one were free ideas, just frames that you make up, and you can start with some of mine and then go to some of your own, and try and experiment with what makes sounds that you're interested in. What are the sounds that are available to you? Then the next one was to play some melodies by ear. When I used to take lessons with a great classical pianist piano teacher that I studied with, she used to always say, okay, now improvise it. And her sense of improvising was just if you took the arpeggio that was in, that was written in the piece of music and you changed the order of the notes. And she was like, it's improvising. So she had a very loose definition of improvising. Anytime you changed the notes on the page, it was improvising. Sometimes she would say, outline the piece, just play the notes that come on the downbeats. For her, that was improvising. So again, you're just trying to come up with a frame that generates something interesting for yourself. So again, as Ed Smaldone said in the chat, experiment, listen carefully. Yes, that is really what you want to do. And whether this leads you to become a composer, an arranger, or a jazz musician, or an improvising classical musician, because there are such things, there are such people, and often composers. But there's a lot of interesting music that you hear from different improvising classical players. And then, so the next one was to just try and play some things by ear and see if you can experiment with finding the roots, or even, really fleshing out the harmony to some degree. So many jazz musicians have come through the church, and I think that kind of playing is really strongly encouraged in a lot of, church accompanying and playing for church services. So that's a kind of world what encourages that kind of playing by ear and harmonizing by ear, and even harmonizing vocal things sometimes by ear. So it's part of that culture. So you want to experiment with that as well, and anything you hear can be a source for that. Anything you hear on YouTube or Spotify or the radio, if anybody listens to the radio anymore, but just taking some tune, and TikTok, I guess, that can that you can just try and imitate something that you heard, that see how much of it has gotten into your head, how much of it can you sing, how much of it can you find on your instrument. So that would be the second one. And then the third thing was taking scales and making melodies out of scales. And again, doing it slowly and thinking of it as music, even though the frame is kind of simple. And then, the fourth thing that I sort of offered was this possibility of doing something with blues. Whatever you're interested in, I think in terms of all this stuff, the thing that you should really be, what determines your direction, what determines your interest is things that interest you. So if you, it's really interesting, going back to that thing I mentioned before when I was coaching the classical string quartet, and they kept playing these romantic sounding cadences when I thought they were going to be playing like these free intervallic things. That's fine. That was what they were hearing. And so, coming up with a frame that really supported the sounds that were coming in, that were in their heads, I really do think that that's the purpose of this. This is to unlock something that's inside of you, and unlock something that might not be so available to you just through the process of reading notes. So if there are any questions, now is the moment.
I'll tell you, David, thank you very much.
You are very welcome.
Yeah, this was great. I hope everybody enjoyed this. Well, anybody have some last questions?
Yeah, one real quick last thing I would say is, I know there are people here on wildly different levels, because I see some pretty different ages out there. This stuff doesn't, for all of it, you can easily just, what's the saying, take what you want and leave the rest. It's like anything that resonates with you as something that you want to try is something that I really encourage you to do.
And I could tell you, people, it definitely works, both from personal experience and then even working with the students. I had asked them to go back and just record themselves for like 3 minutes and just play something, and they all kind of came back with something interesting. You know, it was really good. So, you know.
Yes. All right.
Okay, David. Thank you, Professor Berkman. Thank you. We give you a round of applause. Thank you, everybody, for coming to this. The next one is Thursday. It's a very interesting one. That sounds like David wasn't. That's not the way I meant it, David. It's just, you know, it's a chance to talk about some, current events in the context of music and a musician. So it should be interesting, actually. So I hope you join us for that. We're going to sign off now. And thanks, everybody.
Okay.
See
See
you
you.
later. Bye.